Hollywood doesn't create stars, it manufactures illusions. Behind every perfect smile and golden statue lies something darker. The studios built gods out of mortals, polished their flaws into fantasies, and sold the world a dream that was never meant to be real. For decades, the industry buried scandals under contracts, rewrote reputations, and renamed sins as style. Rage became passion, addiction became exhaustion, lies became legend. And we believed every one of them. These are the stars who lived two lives, the ones who smiled for the cameras while hiding their truths behind closed doors, the ones Hollywood protected, no matter the cost. But what happens when the mask cracks? When the hero's roar hides a storm? When the man who conquered the screen can't control himself in the dark? 15. Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe was built for myth. Broad shoulders, volcanic eyes, a voice that could shake a theater. He was the kind of actor who didn't play heroes, he embodied them. In Gladiator, he gave the world a soldier who fought for justice. Audiences saw nobility and restraint. Hollywood saw profit. Yet, off-screen, the same power that made him magnetic became uncontrollable. The armor never came off. Crowe's temper was legendary. He hurled phones at hotel clerks, cursed producers, clashed with co-stars, and turned press junkets into battlefields. The industry called it intensity, a convenient word for fear. Publicists rewrote the narrative. Every explosion became passion, every outburst method. The machine needed its gladiator, so it rebuilt his reputation after every fire he started. As long as he made money, the rage could be romanticized. But inside, the act was cracking. Friends described a man who wanted calm but only knew combat. He retreated from crowds, poured himself into isolation, and watched the myth of strength consume the man behind it. Fame had fused with identity without the fighter. Who was he? Each interview grew quieter, each smile more defensive. Even his apologies sounded rehearsed, like lines from a role he couldn't quit. Crowe wasn't ruined by scandal, he was imprisoned by image. Hollywood crowned him a warrior, then punished him for believing it. The spotlight that once glorified his fury now illuminated the exhaustion beneath it. Because in the end, the hardest battle isn't on screen, it's with the reflection that refuses to let go. So what happens when the gladiator can't drop the sword? When the legend outlives the man who created it? 14. John Travolta. John Travolta was the golden boy of Hollywood, smooth, magnetic, impossibly likable. From Saturday Night Fever to Grease, he embodied the dream, the small-town kid who danced his way into immortality. To millions, he was confidence made flesh, the man who could charm anyone with a grin and a rhythm. But behind that effortless charisma was a life scripted tighter than any role he ever played. Travolta's rise was meteoric, his image spotless, clean-cut, faithful, wholesome, and Hollywood made sure it stayed that way. But whispers followed him everywhere. Rumors about control, secrecy, and the Church of Scientology's powerful grip on his life. For decades, Travolta's identity wasn't just managed, it was curated, protected by lawyers, publicists, and an institution that guarded him as fiercely as it used him. The man who once symbolized freedom became a symbol of control. Behind the smile, there were tragedies too heavy for the spotlight. The sudden death of his teenage son, Jet, shattered him. Friends spoke of a man broken, yet forbidden to grieve openly. His religion dictated silence. His fame demanded composure. He played roles again and again that mirrored calm confidence, as if pretending on screen could rebuild what life had taken away. Every public appearance became a performance. Every interview, a negotiation between grief and obligation. Hollywood praised his discipline, but it was really repression, a man suffocating under decades of image maintenance. When scandals and rumors re-emerged later in his career, the studio machine spun them as fiction, just as it always had. The illusion of stability was too valuable to lose. John Travolta didn't just act for a living, he acted to survive. He was the smiling face of control in an industry terrified of chaos. But what happens when the mask of perfection becomes the cage? When even the act of grieving must be rehearsed? 13. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson was once Hollywood's favorite kind of hero. Brave, devout, and unbreakable. From Mad Max to Braveheart, he became the face of honor and sacrifice, the man who bled for freedom on screen and preached morality off it. To audiences, he wasn't just an actor. He was a symbol of faith, discipline, and masculine strength. But behind the camera, that faith curdled into fury, and the man who shouted, "Freedom!" was quietly living in chains of his own making. Gibson's darkness didn't erupt overnight, it brewed in silence. Fame fed his ego, religion hardened his certainty, and power shielded his rage. He surrounded himself with enablers who called his paranoia passion and his outbursts artistic stress. But the truth always leaks. When his drunken tirades spilled into public view anti-Semitic slurs, violent threats, and unfiltered hate, the world saw what Hollywood had long known but ignored. The myth of the righteous man was a lie carefully managed by studio spin and denial. Even as recordings surfaced and sponsors fled, the industry hesitated to condemn him. Gibson was too bankable, too iconic, too connected. For years, the machine that made him famous worked just as hard to keep his sins hidden. When he fell, it wasn't because Hollywood chose truth, it was because the lies finally became unprofitable. In exile, Gibson turned to religion and self-redemption, directing The Passion of the Christ, a brutal masterpiece that critics called both divine and deranged. It was art as confession, violence as prayer. He said he had changed, but his eyes still carried the weight of a man who couldn't tell the difference between punishment and forgiveness. Mel Gibson's story isn't one of downfall, it's one of exposure. The faith he claimed to live by was never his salvation, it was his disguise. So what happens when belief becomes a weapon? When the man preaching morality can't live by his own gospel? 12. Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey was the actor everyone respected, a chameleon of charm and intelligence who could make evil feel elegant. From The Usual Suspects to American Beauty, he became Hollywood's symbol of sophistication, the man who didn't just play darkness, he understood it. On screen, he was magnetic. Off screen, he was untouchable. For years, Spacey wasn't just admired, he was protected. The industry adored him because he was profitable, polished, and private. He never married, never shared much, and when whispers began about his behavior with young men, the silence around him was deafening. Executives brushed it off. Colleagues avoided the subject. Kevin's just intense, they'd say. His mystery was marketable, and in Hollywood, mystery sells better than truth. Then, in 2017, the curtain finally tore. Allegations of sexual misconduct, some spanning decades, began to surface. The stories were disturbingly consistent. Manipulation, coercion, intimidation. When actor Anthony Rapp spoke publicly about being assaulted as a teenager, the myth of Kevin Spacey, the brilliant, cultured professional, began to rot. In a single day, his career imploded. Netflix cut ties, House of Cards erased him from its final season, and Hollywood pretended it had never known. But the truth is, it always did. The same system that celebrated his genius had buried his reputation for predation. For years, Spacey's power kept him protected. The more successful he became, the thicker the silence grew. And when he finally fell, the industry didn't apologize, it simply moved on, as if the lies had been his alone. Spacey vanished from the spotlight, releasing cryptic videos where he addressed the camera as if still in character, half apology, half delusion. Watching them felt like witnessing a ghost trying to perform humanity one last time. Kevin Spacey didn't lose his career because of the truth. He lost it because the truth stopped making money. So what happens when brilliance becomes camouflage? When the man who played the villain turns out to have never been acting? 11. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was the American dream made flesh, a superstar athlete turned Hollywood darling. On the field, he ran like lightning. On camera, he smiled like he had nothing left to prove. Charisma, charm, confidence, he had it all. For 2 decades, O.J. wasn't just famous, he was adored. A black man who had transcended race, class, and history itself, he became the face of everything America wanted to believe about progress. But behind that polished grin was a man drowning in ego and control. Fame had turned him into an empire. Endorsements, acting roles, celebrity parties, and the illusion of perfection became his addiction. He sold the image of the gentle hero, the loving husband, the clean-cut success story. Yet in private the mask was slipping. Friends saw flashes of violence, jealousy, and possessiveness. Nicole Brown, his ex-wife, lived in fear long before the world learned why. Then came June 12, 1994, 2 bodies found outside Nicole's home. Blood, chaos, horror. The crime shocked America. When O.J. was accused of the murders, Hollywood froze. The same industry that had made him a hero closed its eyes, waiting to see which story would win, the athlete or the monster. The trial of the century became a national obsession, part tragedy, part spectacle. Cameras followed every word, every tear, every glove. O.J. wept on cue, smiled at fans, played the role of innocence with cinematic precision. Millions believed him, millions didn't. When the verdict came, not guilty cheers erupted across the country, but behind those cheers was something hollow. The man who had lived a lie had just performed his greatest role. After the trial, O.J. tried to rebuild his life, writing books, giving interviews, pretending it had all been a misunderstanding. But the truth clung to him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Hollywood never took him back. America never forgot. O.J. Simpson didn't just get away with murder in the eyes of the public, he got away with something worse, convincing the world to keep cheering while he did it. So what happens when the hero becomes the villain and the world can't tell the difference? 10. Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong wasn't just a champion, he was a miracle. The cancer survivor who defied death, conquered the Tour de France 7 times, and turned pain into profit. To millions, he was the living proof that hard work, faith, and grit could defeat anything. Nike built ads around him. Oprah sang his praises. Hollywood called him an icon. His yellow Livestrong bracelets weren't just accessories, they were symbols of hope. But hope can be manufactured too. Behind the glory, Armstrong was running a machine of deception. His wins weren't the result of superhuman strength, they were the product of one of the most sophisticated doping programs in sports history. He lied to teammates, to journalists, to fans, and to himself. Every interview, every tearful denial, every courtroom testimony was a performance. And Hollywood, desperate for heroes, played along. The studios made documentaries, sponsors made millions, and America worshipped its perfect survivor. When the first cracks appeared, Armstrong went on the offensive. He threatened whistleblowers, sued journalists, and destroyed anyone who dared to tell the truth. His power wasn't just athletic, it was institutional. The same system that built his myth had no interest in tearing it down. He was too valuable, too beloved, too perfect. Until the truth became impossible to hide. In 2013, sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, Armstrong finally confessed, but even his confession was rehearsed. He admitted to doping, to bullying, to betrayal, yet somehow managed to sound like the victim. The man who had spent years manipulating belief still couldn't surrender control. The world was stunned, not just because he cheated, but because he had fooled them so completely. His story wasn't about victory, it was about faith weaponized for fame. Lance Armstrong didn't fall from grace. He free fell from a pedestal he built himself, dragging millions of believers with him. So what happens when inspiration becomes illusion? When the man you trusted to defy death was only ever defying the truth? 9. James Franco. James Franco was supposed to be everything Hollywood worships: handsome, brilliant, unpredictable. He wasn't just an actor, he was an idea. A poet, a director, a professor, a man of 100 faces who could talk philosophy in the morning and film chaos by night. He sold himself as art incarnate, the thinking man's rebel. But behind the charm and intellect was a web of ego, manipulation, and control that Hollywood helped disguise as genius. Franco built his empire on contradiction. He taught film at universities while chasing scandal in tabloids. He wrote novels no one read, but everyone discussed. He preached artistic freedom while quietly bending others to his will. To the public, he was eccentric, harmlessly strange. But those who worked with him told another story. Students who felt exploited, actresses who said his mentorship blurred into coercion. The same curiosity he flaunted in art became something darker behind closed doors. When accusations surfaced in 2018, Hollywood hesitated. Franco had just won a Golden Globe for The Disaster Artist, a film about a man who built a fake empire on delusion. The irony was almost poetic. The press called it troubling but complicated. Friends defended him, saying he was misunderstood, a victim of his own intensity. But beneath the surface, the illusion was cracking. His so-called acting school became infamous for blurred boundaries, power games, and quiet settlements. For years, he hid behind intellect. He quoted Hemingway, lectured on art, spoke about human vulnerability, while refusing to show any of his own. His greatest performance wasn't on film, it was in convincing the world he was untouchable. When he finally disappeared from the public eye, he framed it as reflection, as healing. But even in retreat, he was performing. Interviews about growth sounded rehearsed. Apologies felt like essays written for applause. The man who had built his identity on curiosity had finally become the subject of his own experiment, and the result was uglier than any role he'd ever played. James Franco didn't lose Hollywood's favor because he lied. He lost it because his lies stopped being entertaining. So what happens when the intellectual who studied truth becomes the artist who hides from it? When the professor becomes the lesson? 8. Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen was the embodiment of Hollywood excess, talented, wild, magnetic, and unbreakable. For decades, he lived like the industry's favorite contradiction, the bad boy who never paid the price. On screen, he was electric, the charming rogue, the sarcastic genius, the rebel who made self-destruction look glamorous. And off-screen, he played the same role, only without a script to save him. Born into privilege, Sheen didn't just inherit fame, he inherited access. He was raised in studios, mentored by legends, and protected by connections that turned chaos into brand identity. Every scandal, drugs, prostitutes, arrests, became a headline that somehow made him more famous. When 2.5 Men made him the highest-paid actor on television, Hollywood finally had its perfect irony, a man falling apart in real life while pretending to be in control on screen. The collapse was slow, then sudden. Years of addiction, ego, and denial caught up with him. He insulted producers on live radio, fired his publicist, and waged war against the people who had built his empire. But instead of pity, the world laughed. The media turned his breakdown into meme culture. Winning, Tiger Blood, Warlock. The words of a man unraveling became slogans, t-shirts, punchlines. Hollywood didn't help him heal. It sold his madness like a marketing campaign. When Sheen finally revealed he was HIV positive, the laughter stopped for a moment. He said he'd kept it secret for years, paying millions in hush money to protect his reputation. It wasn't just shame that kept him silent, it was fear. The man who lived his entire life on camera had finally found a truth too fragile for the lens. His confession, raw and trembling, was the first time the mask cracked. But even then, the machine kept spinning, turning tragedy into clicks. Charlie Sheen's story isn't just one of addiction or downfall. It's about what happens when fame becomes a drug stronger than any chemical. He wasn't the villain or the victim. He was the product. And when the world had finished consuming him, it simply moved on. He once said, "I have one speed go." But no one ever told him that even rockets burn out. So what happens when the man who laughed at his own destruction finally runs out of punchlines? When the chaos that made him famous is the only thing left of him? Zevon. Casey Affleck. Casey Affleck was never the loud one. While his brother Ben chased blockbuster fame, Casey carved a quieter path, the introspective actor, the indie darling, the artist who seemed to exist above Hollywood's noise. He was the kind of performer critics loved to call authentic. His eyes carried weight, his silences, meaning. To audiences, he represented something rare sincerity in a city addicted to spectacle. But authenticity can be a costume too, especially when the industry wants to believe in it. Behind the soft voice and modest smile was a man Hollywood protected in whispers. During the filming of I'm Still Here, 2 women accused him of sexual harassment, disturbing details hidden behind non-disclosure agreements and settlements. The stories were hushed, the lawsuits sealed. His reputation, instead of collapsing, quietly recovered. By the time he won the Oscar for Manchester by the Sea, the machine had fully repaired him. He walked onto that stage, humble and composed, while the same town that had punished others for similar sins stood and applauded. Affleck became the embodiment of Hollywood hypocrisy, the proof that power doesn't just shield those who shout, but also those who whisper. Reporters called his case complicated. Critics praised his artistry, and audiences were encouraged to separate the man from the work. It wasn't absolution, it was convenience. Hollywood didn't forgive him because he was innocent. It forgave him because it was easier than admitting it never cared. When the Me Too movement exploded, Affleck stepped back, avoiding interviews, avoiding eye contact. He said he'd grown, that he'd learned from his mistakes. But his words felt clinical, cautious, another performance for survival. The remorse sounded rehearsed, the silence, strategic. The world had changed, but he hadn't needed to. His career remained intact, quietly humming in the background while others burned. Casey Affleck's story isn't about guilt or redemption, it's about privilege disguised as humility. The soft voice that once charmed audiences became the perfect defense mechanism. He didn't shout to deny the accusations, he whispered his way past them. Hollywood loves a good apology, but it loves talent more. So, what happens when silence becomes protection? When a whisper can outlast the screams of those it silenced? 6. Winona Ryder. Winona Ryder was the face of fragile perfection. Big eyes, soft voice, a spirit that seemed too delicate for the world she ruled. In the late 80s and 90s, she became the muse of a generation, the misunderstood outsider, the rebel wrapped in lace. Heathers, Edward Scissorhands, girl, interrupted. She didn't just play vulnerability, she embodied it. Hollywood crowned her the good girl, the one who could make melancholy look beautiful. But no one noticed that beneath that porcelain image, she was already starting to crack. Fame came early, and so did pressure. Every magazine wanted her, every studio demanded her. She became the symbol of a softer rebellion, not loud, but quietly devastating. Yet behind the soft-spoken interviews and shy smiles, Winona was drowning. Her relationships became tabloid headlines, her exhaustion dismissed as eccentricity. She was too gentle for scandal, too valuable for the truth. So when the inevitable breakdown came, Hollywood didn't intervene, it watched. In 2001, the illusion shattered. Winona was arrested for shoplifting thousands of dollars worth of designer clothes, a crime so absurd it felt like fiction. The world was stunned. Why would a millionaire movie star risk everything for something she could easily buy? But it wasn't about money. It was about control, about a woman trying to feel something real in a world where everything, even her identity, had been scripted. The media turned on her overnight. Late-night hosts mocked her, tabloids devoured her, and Hollywood quietly closed its doors. The same executives who had sold her innocence now treated her like a liability. For years, she vanished a ghost haunting the industry that had built and broken her. When she finally returned in Stranger Things, it wasn't a comeback, it was resurrection. Her eyes still carried the same fragility, but now they held defiance too. She had survived the lie. Hollywood called it redemption, but for Winona, It was reclamation. Winona Ryder's story isn't about theft, it's about loss. She didn't steal for greed. She stole to feel alive in a place that had turned her soul into a brand. So what happens when innocence becomes armor and the world punishes you for wearing it too long? 5. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf was Hollywood's favorite prodigy, the kid who made chaos look cool. From Even Stevens to Transformers, he was the scrappy outsider who seemed destined for greatness, the rare child star who could survive fame and turn it into art. The studios sold him as proof that talent could outgrow madness. But what they didn't say was that madness was his fuel, and the one thing Hollywood kept feeding. From the beginning, Shia was addicted to extremes. Fame came too fast, too bright, and too young. He drank to calm the noise, fought to feel real, and turned every set into a battlefield of control. Directors called him intense, co-stars called him unpredictable, and when the cameras stopped, the rage didn't. Arrests followed bar fights, DUIs, public meltdowns, each one spun as eccentric genius, the price of commitment. The line between method acting and self-destruction blurred until no one could tell the difference anymore, least of all him. When he began performing in performance art installations, paper bags over his head, silent apologies in galleries the world watched in fascination. Critics called it brave. Fans called it healing. But for Shia, it was confession disguised as spectacle. He wasn't experimenting with fame, he was trying to exorcise it. The same media that mocked his collapse now celebrated his pain as content. He was no longer a person, he was performance itself. Then came the accusations, abuse, manipulation, violence from women who had once called him brilliant. The artist who claimed to chase truth was suddenly revealed as a man running from it. His apologies came wrapped in poetry, drenched in philosophy, but behind every word was the same old escape, performance as penance. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. He was too talented to erase, too toxic to embrace. So they did what they always do with broken men they once worshipped, they waited. And as they waited, Shia disappeared again, rebranding himself as repentant, rebuilding his narrative for another act. Shia LaBeouf's story isn't about rebellion, it's about repetition. He turned his trauma into theater, his guilt into script. Every confession became content, every sin another scene. So what happens when confession becomes performance and forgiveness just another role to play? 4. Anne Heche. Anne Heche was light in motion, quick, radiant, unpredictable. In the late 90s, she was poised to become one of Hollywood's brightest stars. She could shift from tenderness to torment in a single line, the kind of actress who didn't just perform emotion but seemed to live inside it. To the world, she was fearless, dating Ellen DeGeneres at a time when it could end a career. Defying studio expectations, speaking about love like truth was her religion. But behind that bravery was a woman holding herself together with willpower and denial. Her childhood was a nightmare, hidden under polite silence. Abuse, trauma, secrets she spent years refusing to name. Acting became her refuge, the one place she could channel pain into purpose. But Hollywood doesn't save broken people. It repackages them. When she went public with her relationship with Ellen, the industry turned its back. Overnight, Anne went from rising star to risk. Directors stopped calling. Studios withdrew offers. The same press that once called her bold now called her unstable. Then came the unraveling bizarre interviews, a wandering trip into the desert, claims of hearing voices from another world. The tabloids feasted. They didn't see a woman in crisis, they saw a headline that sold. And Hollywood, once again, watched in silence as another soul it had profited from, burned out under its own light. For years, she fought to reclaim herself, writing memoirs, taking smaller roles, raising her sons with a fierce, complicated love. There were flashes of peace, moments of the old spark. But the past never really loosened its grip. When she died in a fiery car crash in 2022, the news cycle replayed her pain on loop, turning tragedy into content one last time. Anne Heche's story is what happens when Hollywood confuses courage for stability. She didn't lose herself to fame. She was already lost when fame found her. And the world, addicted to spectacle, mistook her suffering for performance. She once said, "I wanted to be loved for who I am." But Hollywood never wanted Anne, only the fragments it could sell. So what happens when honesty looks like madness and the truth becomes too raw for the cameras to film? 3. Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke wasn't just handsome, he was dangerous. He didn't act, he detonated. In the 80s, he became Hollywood's raw nerve, the brooding outsider with the body of a boxer and the soul of a poet. Films like 9½ Weeks and The Pope of Greenwich Village made him a symbol of masculine mystery, the man who could whisper and make it sound like violence. He had everything: talent, beauty, rebellion. But Mickey Rourke was never built to play by Hollywood's rules. He wanted truth in a place made of lies, and when he couldn't find it, he burned everything down trying. The rage that made him magnetic on screen followed him everywhere. He fought with directors, insulted executives, and turned down roles that could have made him immortal. He called Hollywood a town for traitors, yet kept returning to it like an addict chasing a high he swore he hated. As the offers faded, the fights grew louder. By the 90s, he was broke, blacklisted, and bruised another cautionary tale of ego and self-destruction. So he went back to the ring literally. Professional boxing became his new escape, a brutal refuge for a man who needed to feel pain to believe he was still real. The blows wrecked his face, his body, his career. Plastic surgery followed, trying to rebuild what the ring and Hollywood had taken. The handsome rebel who once seduced the world had become a ghost of himself. Then came The Wrestler. Darren Aronofsky's 2008 masterpiece turned Rourke's ruin into resurrection. The performance was haunting because it wasn't acting, it was confession. Critics called it the comeback of the decade, but even in triumph, Mickey seemed uneasy, as if afraid to believe he deserved it. Hollywood applauded, but only because his pain made for a good story. They didn't want the man, they wanted his scars. In the years since, Rourke has become something mythic, half tragedy, half legend. He still walks red carpets in sunglasses and sorrow, part boxer, part poet, still talking about the town that betrayed him and the fame that never let him heal. Mickey Rourke didn't fall from grace, he dove, fists first, into his own destruction, and Hollywood, ever hungry for spectacle, filmed it from every angle. So what happens when your redemption becomes just another performance? When the wounds that made you human become the only thing keeping you relevant? 2. Tori Spelling. Tori Spelling was born into Hollywood royalty, the daughter of legendary producer Aaron Spelling, raised in a mansion so massive it had its own gift-wrapping room. From the start, her life was supposed to be perfect. Beauty, privilege, access. On Beverly Hills, 90210, she played the rich girl with the kind heart, a role that seemed like destiny. But in a city built on illusion, even royalty can go broke. And for Tori Spelling, the fairy tale was always one bill away from becoming a nightmare. Behind the designer clothes and red carpet smiles, the numbers never added up. Her father's fortune, rumored to be worth $500 million, vanished from her grasp after his death, leaving her with a fraction of the inheritance everyone assumed she'd receive. She tried to maintain the image: reality shows, books, boutiques, a curated Instagram of perfect family chaos. But the truth leaked through. Foreclosures, unpaid taxes, lawsuits from credit card companies, all the ugly realities that Hollywood hides behind filters. Tori's life became a performance of wealth she no longer had. Every episode of her reality shows blurred the line between confession and marketing. She cried on camera about debt, yet filmed it for ratings. Hollywood didn't pity her, it packaged her downfall. The heiress-turned-struggler became entertainment, her pain edited into cliffhangers. Even her marriage troubles, her hospital visits, her public breakdowns all became part of the brand. To outsiders, she seemed delusional, clinging to an image that was long gone, but in truth, She was doing what Hollywood had taught her since childhood: never stop performing. Even when the mansion becomes a rental house, even when luxury turns to liability, keep smiling, keep filming, keep pretending. Because in Hollywood, perception is the only currency that never loses value. Today, Tori Spelling lives in a paradox: too famous to disappear, too fragile to thrive. She talks openly about anxiety, debt, and disappointment, yet still poses for magazines in gowns she can't afford. It's no longer a performance. It's survival disguised as glamour. Tori's story isn't about greed, it's about identity. She was born into a fantasy and never learned how to wake up. So what happens when the golden child grows up to find there's nothing left in the castle but echoes? When the dream she sold becomes the debt she can't escape? 1. Wes Bentley. Wes Bentley was supposed to be the next great American actor, haunting, intelligent, born with a face that seemed to understand tragedy before he ever lived it. In American Beauty, he played the quiet boy who filmed life through a lens, whispering, "Sometimes there's so much beauty in the world, I feel like I can't take it." It was one of cinema's most haunting lines, and, for Bentley, a prophecy. Hollywood saw sensitivity. What it missed was fragility. Fame hit him like a flashbulb, blinding, hot, unforgiving. He went from anonymity to red carpets overnight, and the world expected him to carry wisdom his age couldn't possibly contain. But behind that calm stare was a man unraveling. The attention that made him famous also fed an emptiness he didn't know how to fill. He turned to drugs, not for thrill, but for silence. Cocaine, then heroin, his secret religion, in a city that worshipped masks. For years, Bentley lived two lives. On camera, he was brooding, soulful, mysterious. Off camera, he was disappearing. Friends said he'd vanish for days, skipping auditions, burning through money, isolating himself in apartments that smelled of regret. He once pawned everything he owned except his camera, the one object that still reminded him who he'd been before the lie consumed him. Hollywood, as always, looked away. The industry that celebrated his depth never asked what it cost him. When he stopped showing up, they simply replaced him. He became a ghost, the kind of name whispered by casting directors with pity, as if his fall was just another plotline in the great Hollywood tragedy. Then quietly, he got clean. No grand comeback, no talk show confession, just small roles, steady work, humility. When he reappeared years later in The Hunger Games and Yellowstone, the world barely recognized him, leaner, quieter, almost spectral. But his eyes told the truth. He had lived the movie Hollywood would never dare to film. Wes Bentley's story isn't about ruin or recovery, it's about seeing through the illusion. He once filmed plastic bags floating in the wind and called them beautiful. Maybe he knew even then that beauty in Hollywood isn't what shines, it's what survives. So what happens when the boy who filmed the world finally steps out from behind the camera? He stops pretending. And for the first time, that's enough. Hollywood feeds on illusion, it builds gods out of glass and calls the reflection truth. Every smile, every scandal, every redemption arc is just another rewrite of the same story. People pretending so hard that even they forget where the acting ends. These 15 stars weren't villains or saints. They were mirrors reflecting the system that rewards deception and calls it art. Some fell, some survived, some learned to turn confession into career. But none of them ever walked away untouched. Because in Hollywood, lies aren't accidents, they're architecture. The lights don't just hide the darkness, they need it to shine. So the next time you watch a star glowing on the screen, remember, behind every perfect performance, there's a truth they were told to bury. And somewhere, in that silence, the real story still breathes.